co-founder and CEO at Lucid, makers of Lucidchart. Prior to Lucid, Karl spent several years at Google, starting and leading business development at Google's China office, opening Google's patent department and setting patent strategy, and leading Google's investments in advanced wind and battery technologies. Karl holds a bachelor's and master's in EECS from MIT, a master's from MIT in technology and policy, and a law degree from Harvard Law School, where he was an editor of the Harvard Law Review. He was also honored as a 2017 EY Entrepreneur of the Year and Utah Business Magazine's CEO of the Year.
Most of you know that we began our Focus Fridays initiative 2 years ago. And so those of you who don't know, we have no class, Huntsman School has no classes on Fridays, and the entire programming is developed around career development opportunities. And the signature event is this leadership forum. And we just did some quick analysis. You know, all of you have to swipe your cards as you come in so we know the numbers. This year, not counting today, we had over 1,640 students attend Leadership Forum for the academic year. That's a 37% increase over last year, so thank you. And Karl, thank you for helping us close out this year. What some of you may not know is this whole program is really owned and operated, as it were, by our students. They're here early in the morning, they're here late at night, they're planning these events, they're working on the logistics of it, they're the ones who put out all these chairs, they tear down everything, and so this initiative could not happen without the work of these students. And I just want to take a minute to recognize those students. Some of them are graduating, and we'll miss seeing them here, so please join me in thanking. And I'm going to read so I don't miss, there's 11 of them. Lincoln Archibald, Kyle Davies, Rebecca Erickson, Sierra Hilton, Corinne Huckvale, Haley Larson, Kaylin Lovelace, Derek Morales, Eric Osterhut, Jordan Price, Hadley Sargent, Garrett Steed, and Chelsea Yoshikawa. Thank you. I do want to pick on one of them, Garrett. Let's see it. We have to have our socks. I've got moose today.
I was looking at that and I was going to compliment you on your socks and feel very inadequate here. So
these are a gift for my girls from Grand Teton National Park General Store. You didn't know you could buy socks there, did you?
Yeah.
So Karl, thank you. Thanks for making the trip up. I'm glad that this weather in the spring has been so off and on. I'm glad that we could roll out a nice day for you. If we could start, tell us about Lucid. Tell us a little about the company, about Lucidchart and Lucid Press.
Sure. And thanks for having me here and for having us here. We're excited, and it is a beautiful day. So thanks for being here as opposed to, enjoying the outdoors. I hope I'm not what stands between you and your weekend. So Lucidchart is a web-based diagramming, but more than diagramming, it's a way for people to visualize complex systems and processes and to layer understanding on top of that by importing and providing data in context. So, Lucidchart started out as very much a simple diagramming tool or application, much like an OmniGraph or Microsoft Visio, if any of you have used that before. But where we're really seeing the opportunity and where we're going is allowing people to map out in a visual way complex systems and processes so you can make sense of it for yourself. But then on top of that, we know that you're being inundated more and more with information from all sorts of systems and tools that you use. So we're trying to provide that information in the context of how your system and process is operating so that you can understand it better and hopefully improve it. So that's Lucidchart. Lucid Press is our second product that sort of we started. It started off as a little bit of a 20% kind of project. We wanted to prove to ourselves mainly, but also to others that we weren't just diagramming, we could do more. And so it is a visual layout and design application that's actually really found quite a foothold in the education space, a lot of K through 12 education. And then also actually interesting is in brand management. So where you have distributed teams and workforces, but perhaps a centralized design team who wants to control the look and feel of their brand, but allow others to self-serve different collateral that they have, might be marketing collateral or sales collateral. And it allows allows the central team to control the brand, but yet allow other people to customize it as needed.
That's great. So as CEO, do you have a typical day?
Yeah, unfortunately, it seems it's a lot of meetings, and I don't know if that just comes with the territory, but I think it's trying to help coordinate different items and initiatives. Fortunately, we have a fantastic team, and so honestly, they do all the hard work, and so I'm just trying to keep up and learn what's going on. Yeah.
I was reading some of Karl's blog posts last night, and he focused a lot on leadership and culture. And I'd encourage all of you, just Google Karl Sun Forbes, and that's the easiest way I found to get to the blogs. So let's sort of back up and talk about leadership. What were some of your earliest leadership lessons?
Yeah, that's a great question. And, I think the ones that stuck home, I thought about that and the mentors I've had, and I think there have been different people at different phases, of course, as I think is true with everyone. I think the first one really was not about leadership, but just the kind of person and individual you wanted to be. And I think it was that idea of perseverance and working hard and trying to knock down roadblocks that were in your way and not giving up. So this idea of perseverance. And I think that came, a lot from my parents, but also teachers in school. So I think that was one. As I think about others I've learned in terms of people I've worked for, I did a clerkship for a year for a federal judge who is in Washington, D.C., and he was just a fascinating person. He had a great career as a lawyer. In fact, ended up running his firm, which was a very large, prestigious firm in D.C., Washington, D.C. And then he was tapped to become a federal judge and went into that, which is, quite a different lifestyle, quite a different mode, because, there you have to be careful about who you're talking to preserve impartiality and things like that. But he taught me a lot of great lessons about what you should be doing individually, but also how you should interact with others. And the idea of trying to listen to multiple different perspectives and not judge too early, but to really be open to other ideas and perspectives, which I'm still working on.
Yeah, that's great. Now, you studied engineering and computer science at MIT. So tell us about that decision. What led you to MIT and what led you to study engineering?
Yeah, so I think, I grew up always being like, one of those math and science kids, like I liked those better. Writing was a little bit more of a challenge for me, always like pulling teeth. And I think, so that came a little bit more naturally to me. Perhaps part of it was because my father was an engineer, a research engineer. He worked for General Motors, so one of the big three automakers. So he certainly didn't steer me or my brother as well into engineering, but I think we both went down that path, perhaps because we were familiar with a little bit of what he did, and so that's what led me to study engineering. It was so I always thought when I went to school that I wanted to be a research engineer, perhaps even go into academia, do research, teach, and then discovered actually relatively late in my undergraduate career that I wasn't sure I wanted to do that. There was not one area that I was so passionate and love about that I wanted to spend another 5 or 6 years diving deep and getting a PhD, which is in the field pretty much required for certainly going into academia. Yeah. And so it was at that point I started to look around and see what other options were open, and ended up in law school and in this policy program, in part because I loved the technology and I thought I might want to do sort of science and technology policy at some point. And so I figured having that legal background would be useful.
Right, so you went from MIT to Harvard Law. And after Harvard Law, you practiced law for a few years.
Yes.
And then you ended up at Google.
Right.
What was Google like in those early days?
It was a lot of fun. There's actually a fun story about how I ended up at Google. So I was practicing law in the Silicon Valley Bay Area, and I was doing mainly the startup legal practice, which means corporate transactional practice. So a few people would come in the office and they have an idea, they want to start a company, and we would do everything from helping them start the company, form the company with incorporation paperwork, to different financings as they were trying to bring in money to grow the business, to obviously commercial transactions and ultimately maybe even mergers and acquisitions, things of that nature. But because I was an engineer, I was doing a little bit of patent work on the side. And in fact, the judge I clerked for in Washington, D.C. was on a court that is known because they handle all of the patent appeals cases across the nation. And while I was practicing law, I got a call from a friend who had actually clerked for the same judge 2 years before I did. And so he was actually one of the people who interviewed me when I was interviewing for this clerkship with this judge. And he was the first lawyer at Google. And he said, we're looking for someone to come in and start the patent department. And he also said, well, when we interviewed you for the clerkship, everyone else thought we should hire you. I was the one who said, no, we shouldn't hire that guy. So I figured I owed it to you to see if you wanted this job. And so, this was back in 2002. And at the time, I think people had started to use Google as a search engine, but you guys are probably too young to remember. But back in the day, there were search engines were a dime a dozen. There was Alta Vista and Lycos and the Ask Jeeves even, and things like that. So I went there, and I had known about Google as a search engine, but there was nothing special about it. But what I found was when I went there and was interviewing, I was just blown away by the quality of the people there, both in the legal team, which is directly where I was interviewing, but also because I was going to be the patent lawyer working with the product managers and the engineers, was just astounded at the amazing people. And I thought, wow, there must be something interesting going there. And that's really what drew me there. And so it was a lot of fun. In part, my job was to talk to the product managers and engineers, see what they were working on, and encourage them to patent it if it was appropriate. And so my job was sort of get out and to meet a lot of people, which was a lot of fun, a lot of fascinating people.
Yeah. So what did you see there that you still try to practice at Lucid?
I think sort of the people. I think that's something that's been pretty foundational and core for us as we build a company, is just this idea of finding great people, and great people in the sense that they're obviously talented at what they do, but also just very motivated and driven and passionate about building something. And finally, just people that you enjoy spending your time with. I think at Google, we had this sort of, no jerks tolerated attitude. I mean, there are some people who are very bright, very successful, but they achieve that by sort of yelling and screaming and demanding. And that wasn't tolerated very well there. And I think that's something that we've cared very much about, is finding the right fit of people.
Right. So while at Google, you met Ben Dilts. What was it about Ben that convinced you to take this big risk, leave this great job at Google, and go into a startup?
Yeah, a great story. So I was at Google in California for a while, and then actually had the chance to go overseas to China with Google to help work on the China office there. And that was, we knew that moved the family out there. And so we knew that was sort of going to be a couple years thing. And when we moved out there, we knew that we probably didn't want to move back to the Bay Area. I mean, it's a great place for a lot of reasons, but cost of living and traffic are two big reasons that it's not the ideal place. And so we had already decided that we probably wouldn't go back there. And my wife is from Utah, from Sandy, grew up here. And so when we left, she took a teaching job, teaching law school. She's a professor. And that's sort of what brought us back to Utah. And I was still working for Google, but working remotely, which can be a little bit isolating, and also traveling, which that's not the greatest commute. So after a while, I think it was that led me to leave. And it was actually shortly after I left there that I met Ben and became really thrilled with what he was doing. Just very impressed with the product. It was similar in many ways to Google Docs and Google Sheets, which we had been using internally at Google. So I drank the Kool-Aid already on web applications and this idea of the new way of delivering software, constantly updating. And so fell in love with Ben's product. Here was a graphical, visual product that worked in the browser. In many ways, it was a better, more seamless and smooth experience than some of the text-based applications that Google is running, right? Google Docs. Back in the day, it was sort of laggy. And I was super impressed that Ben had built this on his own on nights and weekends. And that's what persuaded me to join him.
Wow. So during your early years at Lucid, you made a decision to slow down and focus on developing a product. And what we see a lot is they lead with the marketing first. And obviously you went against that. So give us your thoughts about balancing that product development versus pushing and marketing that product.
Right. Yeah, thanks. Great question. And I think this probably came a little bit from the DNA that was at Google, which I sort of absorbed some of the learnings there. I think Google has always prided itself on being product-driven, product-oriented, product first, and sort of second in terms of going to the market, like not going to the market with something that they felt wasn't ready. And so I think that was the mentality that I had. I think a lot of people that Ben was meeting and getting advice from at the time when I met him saw the product, also loved it, but said, hey, let's go out hard at this and hire a sales team and let's start selling it. And I think Ben and I shared a philosophy, which is, I think it's a great product, but I think it can be a lot better. And there's a lot of rough edges that need to be polished a little bit. And so I think that came from this idea that we want to lead with a product that people will really love. And it still had its rough edges, don't get me wrong. And hopefully it's gotten a lot better over time. And I sort of feel sorry for the first batch of students we convinced to use in the class. So they sort of tested for us and found a lot of issues. But I think it was that philosophy of going first. And in many ways, it served us very well because even to this day, the self-serve funnel of people finding it and adopting the product on their own is really strong and it helps augment sort of our more sales-focused effort where we have the luxury of going in and talking to companies where there's hundreds of free users already, for example.
Right. So you use taglines like empowering the world to work visually and bringing ideas to life. So what is it about Lucid's tools that make it so much more powerful than others in the same space?
Yeah, the way we like to think about it is, you go back to how people worked like maybe 50 years ago, and people wrote documents on typewriters. You typed. And then, people had ledgers, like literally paper book ledgers that accountants kept their books in. And then, again, you guys are too young, but, when I was growing up in school, teachers, there are these things called overhead projectors. Have you seen them where they have these things and you put this vinyl thing and you write on it and it projects? I think they have these new versions where you can project a screen on the phone, right? But you fast forward that about 20 years or 30 years, and all that became digitized, and it was the Microsoft Office suite, right? It was Microsoft Word and Excel and PowerPoint, and that's how people communicated. And then you fast forward another 10 or 20 years, and now all of those things are in the cloud, right? So you've got now Google Docs, for example, or Quip or other documents, and you've got Google Sheets or Smartsheet or other kinds of online kinds of spreadsheets. But in many ways, the tools have advanced with the times in terms of how they're presented, but we're still working the same way. I mean, it's still spreadsheets, it's still writing out documents. And I think our idea is this thesis that as work evolves, you hear about the future of work, and it's pretty clear that when people talk about the future of work and what skills will allow you and all of us to be successful in the future is more sort of critical thinking skills and sort of creativity, because the more mundane things will get automated. people even talk about things like radiologists, right? Like reading X-rays or CAT scans, or like right now there's a lot of human expertise, like a trained eye can imagine that. But with machine learning and all sorts of these things, it's hard to argue that over time a machine will not be able to do that better and to detect things. And that's actually a big sort of point of liability for the folks in that field, because if you miss something and it was in the CT scan, that's like liability for you. And so even things which is, that's a highly trained profession, right? Like even there are aspects which will be subject to automation. And so our idea is it's really about understanding sophisticated problems, being able to connect dots in different ways, being creative and critical thinking. And so for a lot of people, and for me at least, I think visual thinking, this idea is when you lay something out and you can see it visually, it really helps you understand and it helps you convey that information to others. And so what we're trying to do is to train people, or maybe allow people to think and work in a more natural state. Everything is getting more complicated these days, right? Like the systems you work with, the tools you work with, the processes you're working on, they're all getting more and more complex with more interrelated parts. And it's hard to make sense of that a lot of times. And we hope that allowing you to see that visually helps you understand that and therefore become more efficient and valuable.
That's great. So let me shift a little bit to the culture part. So many of your blogs were about workplace culture. So you still interview every candidate before you hire anybody at Lucid?
I try to, yeah.
How many people do you have today?
We're about 300 people now, full-time, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Why is this important to you, that you see everybody as much as you can?
Yeah, and I think it goes back to what we were discussing before, this idea of great people. I think build a great culture where it's fun to work. I think some of you sooner rather than later, but you'll discover that when you get on to work, you spend a lot of time there, and it's important, I think, that you enjoy and have a passion for what you're doing. I think that makes you a better worker and it's more fulfilling. And so I think that's part of it. But I think also having a great group of people who challenge and push each other in respectful, constructive ways, right, is really helpful, because I think if you're always the best person at what you do where you go, like you can't learn. And so I think finding a diverse group of people who are great at many things, some people at other things, like it's a great environment for you to get a lot more done and also for you to learn. And I think that's what makes work fulfilling.
So from where you sit as CEO, what are you looking for when you talk to any of these people? It could be for any position at Lucid. Yeah. Is there something specific you're looking for?
Yeah, that's a great question. Honestly, and it's just me, I think always intrigued by people who are just really passionate and great at something that they care about. Because, and we found like we've hired people who are were music majors and are great musicians, or are great artists or dancers or sports or something like that. It's interesting because you would think that in today's world, to become really good at something, it takes a lot of practice, right? Like if you're a musician, that's hours and hours. People talk about 10,000 hours. Right. Or if you're if you're, even if it's computer science, those things take time. And you would think that being great at something might mean that you spent all your time at it and therefore you're not good at other things. But I've actually found sort of the opposite, which is people who are really passionate and great at one thing tend to be the same people who are or have the potential to be great at other things, because they've learned what it takes. They have the innate sort of curiosity and drive to go succeed at something. And so we've actually found I think one of the very first people we hired was sort of an amateur, not amateur, but sort of semi-professional photographer. And it was beautiful what he'd done. And we hired him work on support and ultimately on product, right? But it's, just finding incredible people, I think is what I've done.
Is there one question that you find yourself asking repeatedly to sort of gauge that?
Yeah, there's a few, but I think one that's always interesting is just telling us about something like really challenging and difficult that you've done, and how you've done it, right? And so digging in and understanding that.
Yeah. You also wrote another blog recently about your views on work-life balance. And we were talking before we started about Lucid took their entire employee base to a place up in Bear Lake, 300 some odd people. So share with us some thoughts about how work-life balance is different for each person, but it's important for everybody.
Yeah, and so I don't know if what I said in that piece was a little controversial, but what I said is work-life balance, I think, is you make your own balance, and that happens both in terms of today, but also over the course of your career. So and it's different for everyone, right? I think one way to think about work-life balance is balancing the timeline of your career progression. And I think I've subscribed to the view that early on in your career is a time when it's easier to work really hard, right? Because there are less constraints and outside demands, perhaps, on your time. There are always other things, but it's easier. Whereas as you've progressed further along, oftentimes it's family kinds of demands, which are important and you need to prioritize. But so early on, I think working hard can set you on a trajectory that is steeper and will let you get to a place where it'll be easier to have a better balance later on. Now, I'm not suggesting necessarily that means you have to, go to a place where you're working 80 to 100 hours a week coming right out of school. Although a lot of people do that because they're able to do that. But then, 2, 3, 5 years down the road, they're at a place in a trajectory where it allows them to create more balance. So that's one kind of work-life balance that I think people don't typically talk about. The other one, which I talked about, was for me, and again, this is controversial, I think, but for me, like the personal and the professional sort of blend together. And what that means is, like, I can be at work and, my daughter has a concert that's at school, and I will leave work and I will go to that concert, and then I will come back, right? And, we have a family vacation, and we'll take that. At the same time, the flip side, which can also be challenging, is, if we're on vacation and I need to be on calls, I'll take the calls, I'll make time, and sometimes that's not the most convenient because it's at a dinner time, but you try to schedule things out. And so for me, it's become sort of seamless, which I think really rubs some people the wrong way. I mean, they want to have, like, when I'm working, and when I'm not working, I'm not working. And that is fine too, and some people find the balance that way. So I think it's just up to your style and how you can accomplish what I think you need to accomplish to sort of advance your career the way that you want to, and the way you see fit.
We've actually had some people right here who've talked about it in terms of work-life integration. Mm-hmm. And same thing, that it works for them, it doesn't work for everybody, and you've got to find your own way. I think I read in that same post that Ben talked about the fact that for him, work ends when he leaves.
Right.
And that works for him. So you have to find your own balance.
Yeah, Ben says that, but he's also the kind of tinkerer where he'll get back and oftentimes it'll be at night. Like, if you give him a hard problem, he may come back over the weekend and have solved it just because he wanted to. Yeah. But
So one final question from me before we open up to the students. So you're not from Utah. You didn't grow up here. I think I read that Ben, neither did Ben.
Right. He's from
Pennsylvania. You had opportunity to put Lucid wherever you wanted to. You had been based in Silicon Valley. Obviously, you could have gone there. You went to school in Boston. You could have put it there. So why did you choose Utah?
Yeah. So a bunch of reasons. And one is this is actually a great place to, I think, build a career and start a career. I'll be honest. So I lived in Utah now for 11 years. So we moved back in 2007, and at the time I was still working for Google, and so I spent all my time, out in California or traveling or video conferencing to California. And I think I would have said, honestly, if someone asked me at that point, Utah, much better quality of life in terms of travel. I mean, in California, in LA or San Francisco, if you go to the big city, you plan your life around traffic. It's sort of like between 3 o'clock and 7 o'clock in the afternoon, just don't go anywhere. Like if you're at home, stay at home. If you're at work, stay at work. Otherwise you're just going to burn 2 hours in traffic anyways. With kids and stuff like that gets harder. So I would have said back then that, better quality of life, maybe in the tech and software side, which is where I was, maybe taking a little bit of a step back in terms of career. I think that has totally changed. I mean, I think Utah, just the economy is growing, thriving. I think in our space, the tech software space, it's going gangbusters. Pluralsight just filed to go public a couple weeks ago. Rumors are, Domo and Qualtrics. I mean, those are all going to be really successful companies, and you can see the success. And I think people outside of here are recognizing that. Maybe not the general public, but those in the industry certainly. So I think that was one of the reasons. There was a personal element to it too, which is my wife took a teaching job here. She's from here, so that, I won't lie, that had a factor to it. But then, when we started, a lot of the people that we got early funding from were from the Bay Area through some connections that I had, and a lot of them encouraged us to go out to Silicon Valley because this is where it's at. And look, that's a huge hub, and I don't think anywhere is ever going to compete in terms of concentration. There were even some investors who said, "We love what you're doing, but we'd love to invest, but only if you're here in Silicon Valley." And I think Ben and I decided that we didn't want to do that. And it's turned out fantastic, honestly, because I think we have a tremendous workforce here in Utah. I think it's only getting better, and it's a place where you can really grow a company. And Silicon Valley, and that's the place I know best. But it's become so frenetic and hectic that honestly, I think there's a little bit of a culture there of what's the next big hot thing, right? So it was Google, and then it was Facebook, and then it was Twitter, and now it's Snapchat or Uber or whatever it is, and I think people just jump around a lot. Actually, I saw a recent stat, this was on the software engineer side, but the average tenure of a software engineer, and they listed the big companies, Google, Facebook, Twitter, is like a year and a half or something like that. And it's hard to build a business if people don't really want to, because it does take time, it does take effort from all of us, right, to build something up if you're always just jumping around to what the next big thing is.
Yeah, that's great. Well, I think we have some mobile mics here. Questions from the audience?
My name's Jordan Price. I'm studying business administration and HR. My question, I'm curious, with new employees and with students who are graduating especially, what deficiencies might you recognize, or what can we do as students to better prepare for the job market?
Ooh, that's a good question. What deficiencies? We've historically hired a lot of people straight out of school. And as we grow, and our hiring philosophy early has always been, let's hire someone who's passionate, eager to learn. And if you were to give me someone with a decade of experience, in the right role, but maybe a little bit more passive versus someone who is young and eager to learn, I would say I'd take the second person 9 times out of 10, right? As we've grown and matured, and we've gotten larger and we've got a lot of young people, I mean, I do think there is some value in having people who have some experience, right? So I'm not trying to denigrate experience, but we've always been pretty high on people coming in and learning what they need to do. And so I think for us, in general, if you're willing to learn and put in the time and effort, there's not a whole lot of things that you can't learn. So to me, it would just be, on the other hand, if you're not willing to learn, that's a whole other story, right? So I'd say it's just, realize where you're at, realize where you want to be, and realize that there's a lot of opportunity for you to learn and grow. But I do see that. So I'm not sure I see any that's lacking in people.
So I know recently Lucid got a new office, and there's been a lot of growth. You mentioned 300 employees. I just kind of want to see kind of what your vision for Lucid is in the next 5 to 10 years, more products, growth, stuff like that. What you kind of see coming up in the future? Yeah,
thanks for the question. I think, if I'm being honest with you, when we started the company, Ben and I had this idea of what we could be and what our products could be. But the early years were building an online collaborative Visio replacement, right? That's what Ben's problem was. He was using Visio with the team. It wasn't working well because they were printing out reams of paper and drawing on the diagram. And then the one guy who had Visio was trying to collate all the changes, and they never knew what was going on. It took us, 5 years to sort of really get to a place where we felt that, yeah, we've got a great product that people prefer over Visio in many ways, but it was still solving the same problem. I think where we're trying to go is move well beyond Visio, well beyond what people have historically thought of as diagramming, both in the sense that I think diagramming, due to the way it's been marketed by Visio and Microsoft, who owns it, has been it's this specialized niche thing that very technical people like network engineers or business process gurus use. And I think what we're trying to say is, no, this idea of thinking visually and understanding complexity in a visual way is something that probably everyone, every knowledge worker at least, could benefit from. And so our sort of, big audacious vision and goal is that as many people should be using diagramming in a larger context, and hopefully Lucidchart, as use spreadsheets, right? Back in the day, only accountants used ledgers and spreadsheets. But you think about today, there's any number of problems that people turn to a spreadsheet, whether it's list of things. And in fact, almost all of them are not accounting finance based, although those people use it too. And so our goal is to get to a point where people will come to realize, oh, that's the kind of problem that I can solve by mapping out in a visual way. Just like people would say, oh, yeah, I can do that by putting this into a spreadsheet and running it.
Yeah.
So that's it.
Is there anything you'd wish that you'd known before taking on the role that you have now, or any major challenges that you faced?
Oh, yeah, there's a lot of things. Well, so look, I mean, this is, I worked as a lawyer, and so I advised companies and saw companies grow. And then I was at Google relatively early. It was about 500 people, and then grew from there. But this is the first time I've ever started to run a company, and so we're constantly figuring it out. And what works and when you're 25 people is quite a bit different than when you get to 75 to 100 people. And then it changes again when you get to 300 people for sure, right? And I think being more deliberate and more communication is something that I wish I'd known about. I think we've done a better job. I don't know if Ruby and Andrew would agree. I hope they would. But when you're smaller, everyone sort of knows what everyone is doing. You chat all the time. And communication is not too much of an issue. But when you get to a point where now you have different departments and groups, and maybe people within the groups know what each other are doing, but they certainly don't know, like engineering doesn't know what marketing is doing, and vice versa. You start to get miscommunications, and things can get misinterpreted. And you know, like when you write an email, like oftentimes that can get interpreted different ways. And I feel like when you have a relationship with someone and they say something and you interpret it a little bit off, you give them the benefit of the doubt, or you go talk to them and you smooth things out. Whereas if you don't, you feel like they're attacking you or something, and a lot of things can fester and sort of grow there. So I think being more deliberate in how we communicate as a company and how different teams and departments work with each other and communicate, I think that's something that I've learned over the last year or so, and that's something that I wish we would have been more deliberate about earlier on as well. So
We have time for one more quick question.
So you mentioned that math and science was kind of a natural born skill to you. I'm just curious as to if you felt that leadership was the same way, and how you've kind of approached leadership and being a leader within Lucid.
Oh, gosh, thanks. No, I would say not. I think when I grew up, I was always the shy, reserved kid, and so I guess to me, leadership, like, there's different forms of leadership. There's like the rah-rah, like rally the troops kind of leadership, and honestly, I'm not very good at that. And hopefully, like we've grown a culture where our leadership means trying to lead by example, and lead by empowering other people. And so, but I think there are different leadership styles that you get into, and I think you have to learn what works for you. And the other part is, like, I think having the balance between having confidence and self-confidence, but arrogance, and it can be a fine line. And I think humility and learning a balance there, I think is important. So
That's great.
All right, well, let's thank Karl one more time for coming here today.
thanks. And I'll just make one more pitch. I mean, I imagine a lot of you are from Utah. Some of you are probably not, but yeah, things are going great here, and best of luck to you wherever you want to go. But I'll tell you from the outside perspective, from people we talk to in California, from the East Coast and West Coast, people are excited about what's going on here, and hope that you are too. So thanks.
Thank you. Thank you. It's great.